Hey guys, welcome to a new class of American and European Relations. Today is a bit of a different day because we shouldn't be here in class. We should actually be at Feria here in Sevilla. So, well, yeah, it's a pity, but it is what it is, so we have to take it, and hopefully you will be able to come any other year to visit the friends you've made in Sevilla and to enjoy the Feria. Today we're here for a different reason. We are here to talk about Russia. And as I told you, it's important because actually on Thursday a pop quiz is going to be available about the content of this class, this session, and the one that is going to take place on Wednesday. So let's get it started. Today is going to be divided in two different videos. The first one talking about the early days of the Russian Federation, this one, and the second one I'm going to be discussing the post-Cold War relations with the West, the Ukraine invasion, and last but not least, I'm going to mention the Russian electoral interference, both in the US in the presidential election in 2016 and also in the European election in 2019. So let's get started. Where had we left it? If you remember well, when we studied world history, we left it actually when the Soviet Union was about to collapse. We tried to understand the end of the Cold War. We talked about these two concepts that you can read there on screen, that are perestroika and glasnost, referring glasnost to freedom and to opening to liberties, and everyone could do it its own way. Actually, as a result of glasnost, the Sinatra doctrine was possible. And on the other hand, perestroika was opening to the economy to the market. And we know the result of that, and we know how that actually was one of the factors that resulted on the fall of the Soviet Union. But let's see how that happened. We know that actually in 1989, the Berlin Wall had fallen, and already at that time, we more or less knew the fate of the Soviet Union. We knew what direction they were walking. We just needed to know how it was about to happen. And the spring elections in 1991 were quite an interesting, were a turning point in a sense. I mean, we are talking about elections to the Russian Federation. I mean, you know that the Soviet Union was made of different federations brought together. That's why it was an union. That's why we talk about and Russia was one of these federations. So it was Ukraine. So it was, we have several. We have Belarus, we have Kazakhstan, etc., etc. And in the Russian Federation elections in 1991, it was the first time that glasnost was being used. In a sense, actually, it was the first time that people could run outside of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. And this man that you can see in the picture, Boris Yeltsin, who was a former Communist Party member, in that elections he ran as an independent, and he won the elections as an independent. And already that was pointing in the direction of change. I mean, you can understand that was already, something very different after so many years of ruling of the Communist Party without allowing anyone else to interfere in politics. Someone that is an outsider, it's not an outsider because he was a former member of the party, but someone who runs as an independent, that he wins the election, obviously that was a big shock. And actually this was June, it was early June 1991. Later that summer, in August, the powers kind of responded to this. By the end of the day, the institutions of the Soviet Union were still in power, and military were afraid that they were going to lose power if Boris Yeltsin, if glasnost by the end of the day was going ahead. They didn't know the fate of their power, so to say. And in August, they perpetrated a coup. However, this coup failed. It failed to gain support, and actually was played in favor of Boris Yeltsin because it reinforced his position as a president of the Russian Federation. You can see him there actually on top of one of the tanks outside of the Russian parliament. And actually that reinforced his position. And reinforced his position towards what? Remember that this time we still had Gorbachev as Secretary General of the party, as actually leader of the Soviet Union. However, in Valovetse Accords in December 1991 is when it was decided that that was it with the Soviet Union, that the Soviet Union was going to be dismantled. And from that point, we were going to start talking about independent states. And there we have, actually in that picture, we have represented Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia. And from that time, we can say that de facto Soviet Union does not longer exist, and actually decompose in all these different states, as I was saying. What was some first decisions that had to be made had to do with the with the economy, and is what it was called the shock therapy. By the end of the day, just imagine a communist country walking into the liberalized markets, and that was difficult. It was a difficult step. It were difficult steps to follow, and it's what we call the shock therapy. I mean, economists recommended this to the Russian Federation to follow. We are no longer talking about the Soviet Union anymore, obviously, and it had different parts of it. It had to liberalize the market so everyone could access it. It had to privatize certain companies that were ruled by the state, and actually these we'll see that had consequences. And also, well, I mean, by the end of the day, financial stabilization, we'll see that that didn't really resulted well for the Soviet Union, for the Russian Federation, sorry. But shock therapy, by the end of the day, was the rapid transformation into a capitalist economy of the Soviet, I mean, of the former communist economy of the Russian Federation. The results of the shock therapy were terrible. I mean, by the end of the day, you can see the inflation rate there, how it got out of control. Obviously, these made people poorer. By the end of the day, I mean, I don't know if you're familiar, inflation rate by the end of the day is the prices and how people were losing buying power day after day. And this was terrible because this results into real poverty, and actually that has direct impact on health and life expectancy. And we actually see how Russian life expectancy dropped during that. Obviously it was already dropping. We said that this was one of the reasons why the Soviet Union collapsed, but actually how it went even worse after they embraced capitalism through this shock therapy. One of the other results of the shock therapy was the creation of oligarchs. By the end of the day, people who were in position of power and who were able to benefit from the privatization of particularly gas, oil companies and other monopolies in Russia. By the end of the day, took it all, benefited greatly. Whoever was able to buy at that time, by the end of the day, was able to reach themselves to a massive degree. And it was this time with this shock therapy with Boris Yeltsin in power when this kind of cast was created in Russia, and they were really, really powerful, really influential, because by the end of the day, they controlled the economy. 1993, because of all these, of the consequences of the shock therapy, and but also, and more importantly, because the constitutional reforms that he was trying to pass, Boris Yeltsin, and how this constitutional reform was making Russia even a more presidentialist regime, giving more power to the president and taking it away from parliament. It was a crisis and well, it was not a coup whatsoever, because by the end of the day, it was not armed. It was actually the parliament trying to vote down Boris Yeltsin, and Boris Yeltsin responding, taking the tanks to the street. And actually, that building you can see in the picture, you saw it before. Actually, Boris Yeltsin was standing in the tank before that building. Actually, that's the parliament, and actually the military set the parliament on fire. And actually, over 100 people died in that crisis. And by eventually, 1993, the constitutional reform was passed. It was voted by the people, and Boris Yeltsin reinforced his role as president of the Russian Federation, not only for himself but for the presidents to come. Actually, it's a position. It's one of the presidents in the world that has the most power. The economic situation did not improve greatly. We actually see how late 1998, early 1999, Russia suffered another inflation crisis, and this had to do with the financial markets and the Asian crisis, and how Russia's economy was exposed to those. And yeah, I mean, this was another political crisis. At that time, the leadership of Boris Yeltsin was put in question, and how the whole process of transition was handled was put in question itself. Actually, related to this, I should have said it before with the shock therapy, and it's quite different if you analyze China and Russia. If you compare both of them and how they walk towards capitalism and how successful China has been, so to say, by taking that. Remember, we had that class with Fernando, how they took it slowly and how they transitioned into it, and what a failure it was for Russia to expose directly its economy to capitalism. But yeah, but that's another story, and this is why another consequence of that another financial crisis, because of the weakness of the Russian economy. And also, I mean, there was an issue here, and it was had also to do with the lack of leadership and with the lack of clear successor for Boris Yeltsin. And at this point in 1999, actually, a young politician, former KGB agent, Vladimir Putin, comes into the picture. And actually, next week, on Wednesday, we're going to be talking about Chechnya wars, and we are going to be talking about Vladimir Putin's role in those wars. But by the end of the day, actually, the second Chechnya war took place in 1999, finished in 2000, actually only a week before the elections. And at that point, it was clear that Vladimir Putin was the person to succeed Boris Yeltsin, that you can see in the picture, and to become the new president of the Russian Federation. So we're going to take a break here, and we're going to take it after the break. See you in a minute.